They say the older you get, the quieter your entrances become. No fanfare. No loud hellos. You just arrive. That's what I did that night. Slipped through the frosted glass door of a downtown Palo Alto restaurant, past a hostess who didn't recognize my name, into a private dining room filled with too much laughter and not enough listening. I spotted Evan immediately, my former colleague turned venture capitalist, flanked by three younger founders, all mid-laugh over something that probably didn't warrant it. The room reeked of expensive cologne and the unearned certainty of people who hadn't been punched in the gut by the market yet. They all looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I was seen. Then filed away. Indexed. Probably under older guy Evan used to work with. Evan greeted me with the performative warmth of someone who wanted points for the invite. Michael. Glad you could make it. His handshake was firm, rehearsed. He introduced me to the others, rattling off names, company tags, funding rounds. Each one nodded like they were speed scanning my LinkedIn profile in real time. None of them asked what I did now. That was the first tell. We took our seats. I ended up at the far end, across from a woman who spent 10 minutes explaining a blockchain wellness app to someone already scrolling his phone. I smiled politely, as I would all night, letting the jargon wash over me. Words like burn rate, hypergrowth, market fit were tossed around with the same emptiness as party favors. Someone ordered 3 bottles of wine before the menus even hit the table. No one asked for a wine list. Just named labels, vintage, confidence. It struck me how much of the room's oxygen was spent on signaling. Who they'd met. What round they were raising. Who passed on them but wanted to stay in the loop. I sipped water. No one noticed. The servers came and went like ghosts, plates cleared mid-sentence, glasses refilled mid-boast. Everything moved fast. Too fast. The kind of tempo that doesn't leave space for reflection, only reaction. I listened. I always listen. At some point, the topic shifted to AI. Of course it did. One of the guys, mid-30s, hair perfect in that startup disheveled way, leaned in and said, honestly, it's not even about the tech anymore. It's about who moves first and fakes it best. They all laughed. He wasn't joking. That was the joke. I glanced around the table, faces lit by ambient lighting and self-importance. I used to chase this once. Used to think validation came in rooms like this. But tonight, there was a comfort in not needing to be the loudest. Not needing to prove I belonged. Evan raised his glass to toast something vague, new ventures, new vision, new vanguard, and I raised mine, too, though mine held only water. As everyone clinked glasses, I looked around and realized no one here was building anything that would last. They were playing the game of short attention, raising money for problems they hadn't bothered to understand. Me? I was building something slower, quieter, something that didn't need their noise. And the funny part was, they didn't even know. It happened somewhere between the second bottle of red and the arrival of the mains. The conversation had drifted into some half-serious, half-performance rant about onboarding Gen Z developers. One of the guys, I think his name was Trevor, made a comment about how the real challenge is getting anyone over 45 to even open a GitHub repo, let alone push clean code. The table erupted. Not malicious laughter, just the reflexive kind. The kind that doesn't check who's listening because it assumes everyone agrees. Then someone else, probably the one with the blockchain wellness startup, chimed in with a smirk. That's why we need to retire the old guard. Make room for people who actually get how things work now. A couple of nods followed. Someone muttered, evolve or get left behind. And, just like that, the table moved on. Jokes flowed. Glasses refilled. No one looked my way. Not even Evan, who was suddenly very interested in cutting his steak. I didn't flinch. Didn't frown. Just sat there, chewing slowly, nodding along like I hadn't just been made a caricature. The old guard. It had a ring to it, like a forgotten battalion guarding gates no one used anymore. And yet, I wasn't angry. Not really. I'd been called worse. Dismissed in more deliberate ways. Hell, I'd lived through a layoff memo where culture evolution was a euphemism for you're too experienced for this phase of growth. What got to me wasn't the jab, it was the assumption that I wouldn't notice. Or care. Because that's what age does to you, right? It renders you invisible until you're needed. A mentor, a contact, a story of how things used to be. You're no longer a player, just a ghost of relevance. I looked around the table again, this time with a different lens. I saw boys in tailored jackets, building sandcastles with venture capital. I saw women parroting innovation buzzwords while checking their follower counts. Bright eyes, quick mouths, fast hands. But none of them looked like they'd survived a crash. None of them carried silence like armor. My fork hovered midair and I imagined saying something. Maybe a polite correction. A mention of the IPO filing I'd signed off on yesterday. The one that would go live Monday morning with a valuation that could fund every startup at this table twice. But I said nothing. Because silence, when earned, is louder than any mic drop. So I took another bite. Let the moment pass. Let them think they were right. And inside, I smiled, just slightly. Not because they underestimated me, but because I knew with absolute clarity that they wouldn't be the ones to last. They'd move fast. And break themselves. And me? I'd already built the thing they thought I was too old to imagine. For years ago, I still wore a badge. Still had a corner office with frosted glass and a desk that buzzed when someone knocked. I was head of product at Solvance, a mid-sized green tech firm doing real work, monitoring emissions, optimizing energy use across municipal buildings, helping cities walk their talk. We weren't flashy, but we were good. That changed the moment our Series C funding round closed and a new board member arrived. He came from one of the big venture firms. Shiny teeth, shiny shoes, and a shiny strategy cut costs, spike profits, repackage, and exit. Fast. The ethos shifted overnight. Suddenly, sustainability became a branding tool, not a mission. Reports were rewritten. Roadmaps gutted. And people like me, who asked uncomfortable questions about long-term outcomes, became inconvenient. The first clue was subtle. My product suggestions started getting looped in later. Then came the meetings I wasn't invited to, the town halls I heard about after the fact. They said they were streamlining verticals. What they meant was, we're replacing experience with velocity. Then one Monday morning, I got an invite, no subject line, just a time. 9:30 a.m. The location, HR conference room, second floor. The moment I saw it, I knew. It wasn't the room that hurt. It was how normal they made it all seem. Rebecca from HR was there. So was Neil, the new COO, sitting across the table like we were about to discuss quarterly goals. Michael, Neil began, we wanted to thank you for your years of service. That's how it always starts. With thanks. With a smile that's been practiced in the mirror. We've been evaluating the structure of our leadership team as we move into this next phase, he continued, hands folded like he was offering me tea. And after careful consideration, we've decided to. He didn't say eliminate. He said realign. Your role, as it currently exists, doesn't fit within the streamlined model we're implementing, Rebecca added, reading from a script that sounded like it had been approved by 3 lawyers and a PR team. No one said I'd done anything wrong. In fact, Neil said I'd been instrumental. But the tone made it clear, my kind of leadership, measured, cautious, stubborn about integrity, was now a liability. They offered a package. 3 months. NDA attached. Mutual separation language. I didn't argue. Didn't beg. Just nodded, asked where to sign. They handed me a box, the kind that collapses after a few uses. I walked back to my office, the one with the window that overlooked the company's solar field, and packed in silence. A photo of my daughter from her graduation. A mug that said carbon crypto. A worn notebook full of sketches for a product that would never ship. As I packed, junior staff passed my door. A few slowed down, eyes darting in. No one came in. No one said a word. Not because they didn't care, but because they'd already learned what happens when you get too close to a fading star. On my way out, I stopped by the break room. Poured myself a bad cup of coffee. Same machine I'd used for 7 years. It sputtered like always. Even then, it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. I stood there a moment, watching steam rise, thinking about everything I hadn't said. About how companies preach innovation but punish experience. How vision gets rebranded as resistance when it no longer serves the quarterly slide deck. No dramatic exit. No final speech. Just the soft click of a door behind me and the sound of a badge being dropped in a plastic tray. I walked out into the cold morning light carrying my little cardboard box. A man unmade by politeness. Not fired. Just removed. Gently. Quietly. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something flickered. A strange, clear silence. Not defeat. Direction. I didn't tell anyone what I was working on, not at first. After Solvance, the offers came in as they always do. Advisory roles, fractional leadership, help us scale. Mostly buzzwords wrapped in ego strokes. None of them felt clean. None of them felt like building. So I stopped answering. I cleared out a corner in my garage, set up a cheap desk, and booted an old ThinkPad. No investors. No co-founders. Just me and an idea that had been collecting dust in the back of my mind for years, a tool for mid-sized logistics companies to actually track and reduce their carbon footprint. Not estimate it. Not offset it. Actually change it. Everyone was obsessed with scale and sexy dashboards. But I kept thinking about truck fleets, regional warehouses, outdated systems duct-taped together with spreadsheets and optimism. The companies that weren't glamorous enough for TED Talks, but moved half the country's freight. The ones left behind by the so-called climate tech revolution. I started with emissions mapping. Built a simple prototype that could integrate with inventory logs and route schedules. It was clunky, fragile, and broke every time a vendor updated their API. But it worked barely. And it was honest. When I showed it to an old friend, someone still in the clean tech space, he blinked twice and said, "Why would you aim that low? That market's too slow to adopt anything new." He meant well. But it stung. Others echoed the same. Too niche. Too slow. Not fundable. And still, every morning, I made coffee, sat down, and wrote code. Rewrote it. Rewrote it again. I read white papers on fleet optimization and public utility reports until my eyes hurt. I reached out to warehouse managers pretending to be a consultant just to learn what reports they wished they had but couldn't afford. I didn't post about it on LinkedIn. Didn't ask for retweets. The silence became sacred. There was no brand. No pitch deck. Just the work. And slowly, things began to click. One small distributor in Reno agreed to test the prototype. Then a cold storage firm in Ohio. They didn't care about UX or whether I used the right buzzwords. They cared that my tool caught waste in their diesel budgeting. I tracked usage obsessively. Not for vanity metrics, but to learn where the friction was. What confused users? What made sense? People thought I was building software. I was building trust. The irony was, I hadn't meant to start a company. I just wanted to prove that the problem could be solved in a way that didn't rely on empty pledges or PR fluff. But the more it worked, the more I saw how much need there was beneath the noise. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove Solvance wrong. I was trying to build the thing they were too impatient to see. There's a certain rhythm you settle into when no one's watching. I'd wake around 6, make coffee, and sit at the garage desk before the sun cleared the fence line. No team meetings. No Slack pings. Just silence, code, and questions no one else had time to ask. The first version of the platform was ugly. Not minimalist, just bare. A spreadsheet might have been more elegant. But it did something their existing tools didn't. It spoke their language. Logistics managers don't want theory. They want dashboards that make them look good in front of their boss. They want red numbers turning green, diesel burn charts that mean fewer late-night calls about fuel costs. I learned that by failing again and again. One early customer dropped out after 2 weeks. Too slow. Too manual. I didn't blame them. Their feedback, buried in a 2-line email, became the backbone of my redesign. There were weeks I didn't speak to anyone except the guy at the grocery checkout. I took every demo call myself. Fumbled some. Nailed others. The first check came from a food distributor in Iowa, $2, $300 for a 3-month pilot. I nearly cried. Not because of the money. Because someone saw it. Saw me. I pitched a few small climate-focused accelerators. Some responded, some didn't. The ones that did seemed confused. "You're targeting mid-tier transport," they'd ask. "Why not go after enterprise-level sustainability officers?" I'd explain that the enterprise clients had already been sold solutions that didn't work. The mid-tiers? They were still trying to figure out how to not go broke every time fuel prices jumped. They'd nod, politely, then pass. Still, I didn't chase. Didn't update my LinkedIn to founder. Didn't go on podcasts. I watched other startups post launch videos with neon branding and pre-seed valuations larger than my mortgage. Good for them. But hype doesn't debug a broken emissions tracker. Most nights, I ate dinner with a laptop open beside the plate. Not out of hustle culture pride, but necessity. When you're building alone, every line of code is a conversation. Every bug, an unanswered question. Slowly, the numbers started to shift. The Iowa client renewed, then referred me to another distributor, this one in Texas. The Texan didn't care about ESG targets. He cared about diesel. Said if I could save him 4%, I was family. I saved him 6.3%. One contract turned into two into 5. Not viral. Not explosive. Just steady. I built trust through latency reports, transparency dashboards, and customer service that looked a lot like me calling them on weekends when their data sync failed. I wasn't trying to look like a CEO. I was being a product guy again. A real one. Some nights, I'd scroll through TechCrunch and see headlines about startups with seed rounds 5 times larger than my total revenue. Founders in hoodies on panels talking about the future of mobility. They had newsletters, strategy teams, media consultants. I had a garage, a whiteboard, and 7 clients. But those 7 clients weren't leaving. They were sending emails with subject lines like, "This actually helps," and "Can you build a reporting widget for audits?" They were giving me feature requests, not pity. I remember one Sunday morning, sitting in the driveway, watching birds tear apart a power line nest. I was tired, deeply, cellularly tired. But I realized I was also content. Not happy exactly. Just aligned. Doing something that didn't need applause to matter. The silence that once felt like exile had become freedom. And maybe the grind wasn't lonely after all. Maybe it was just mine. I didn't even know they were coming until I got the email. "Hey Michael, just a heads up. Someone from Veradigm reached out. Said they offer the same tools as you but sleeker. Thought you should know." Veradigm. A name I knew. Flashy VC-backed climate tech firm with a marketing budget bigger than my annual revenue. I'd seen their landing page once, fluid animations, big slogans, stock photos of diverse teams looking seriously at screens. Their founder was a keynote regular. TEDx, Fortune panels, podcasts with titles like The Green Hustle. And now they were calling my clients. I braced myself. Figured I'd lose a few. Veradigm could undercut my price and outshine my UX tenfold. I couldn't compete with their polish. All I had was clarity. But clarity, it turned out, traveled. My first client in Iowa forwarded me a Veradigm proposal. "Thought you'd like to see how the big dogs pitch," he wrote. The PDF was 30 pages long. Not one of those pages showed actual emission savings. Lots of vision. Very little math. I sent back a single screenshot from our platform, year-over-year diesel reduction, route optimization gains, and a note that said, "This is what we've done for you. Let me know if you need anything else." He replied 5 minutes later, already deleted their email. Over the next few weeks, I got similar messages from Texas, Ohio, even a cold chain operator in Arizona I hadn't spoken to in days. They all told me the same thing. Veradigm talked pretty, but didn't show results. I never went on the offensive. Never badmouthed. Just kept doing the same thing I'd done since line 1 of code: build what worked, explain it clearly, and show the impact. That became my advantage. In a space full of overpromising and underdelivering, I had something they didn't: numbers that made sense to real people solving real problems. I wasn't trying to impress ESG officers. I was helping fleet managers sleep at night. And word traveled quietly but far. A few B2B sustainability newsletters began featuring anonymous case studies that sounded suspiciously like my clients. A LinkedIn thread from a supply chain consultant referenced a lean emissions tracker that's more useful than anything I've seen from Series A giants. I didn't comment. Didn't need to. Then, one day, I got an email from someone named Evelyn Tsai. No subject line, no signature block. Just, "I've heard about your product." Not from investors. From people who use it. "I'd like to talk." No pitch. No rush. We met 2 weeks later in a library cafe outside Berkeley. She was in her early 60s, wore canvas sneakers and no makeup, and carried a yellow legal pad. "I've invested in 41 companies," she said after shaking my hand. "Only 6 are still running. All 6 were founded by people who didn't need to be seen." I nodded, unsure if that was a compliment or a warning. She asked good questions. Specific ones. About data retention, API integrity, user onboarding friction. She didn't care about my vision. She cared about uptime. "By the end of the hour," she said, "if you ever decide to raise, I'd like to be first in line." I didn't say yes. Didn't say no. Just thanked her and went back to work. But I knew something had shifted. The game wasn't about the loudest voice. It was about the last one standing. The word IPO hit the table like a challenge. We were in Evelyn's office, a small, sunlit room above an old bookstore she also owned. No assistants. No whiteboard. Just her, a folder of updated financials, and a quiet suggestion. "You could go public." I stared at the spreadsheet she'd printed. Revenue was steady. Contracts were stacking. Churn was near zero. But it still felt early. "I don't need the circus," I said. "You wouldn't have to play it that way," she replied. Quiet filing. Direct listing. No press tour, no roadshows. Just a clean entry. I paused. I had built every line of this company in silence. The idea of stepping into that world, even with a whisper, felt like stepping onto someone else's stage. But I wasn't building for obscurity. I was building for endurance. And the truth was, I needed the scale. My clients were growing faster than I could support. A public raise could fund integrations, expand support, build infrastructure that wouldn't buckle under demand. "I'll do it," I said slowly, "but we do it my way. No parties. No interviews. No buzz." Evelyn smiled. "That's why I trust you." The paperwork began the following week. She brought in a small legal team, people who spoke like humans, not press releases. They moved with the kind of efficiency that only comes from handling complex filings without the drama of founders needing to be coddled. I signed everything from my kitchen table. No suit. No lawyers glaring over my shoulder. Just me, a black pen, and the knowledge that this wasn't the finish line. It was a handoff to a faster relay. I didn't tell anyone. Not my old colleagues. Not the clients. Not even my daughter. The quiet had served me well for this long, why break it now? The filings were accepted. Ticker symbol assigned. The direct listing was scheduled for next Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Still, I didn't post. I didn't call reporters. I just kept doing what I always did, answering customer emails, debugging integrations, refining carbon report templates for warehouse systems that hadn't seen upgrades since 2003. The night after the SEC approval came through, I sat in my garage office, same desk, same ThinkPad, and stared at the screen. There was no moment. No triumphant soundtrack. Just an inbox full of tasks and a product that still needed polishing. I didn't feel rich. I didn't feel different. I felt steady. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't some grand unveiling of a hidden genius. It was the next version of the same thing I'd been doing since the day I packed my box at Solvance. Build slow. Build true. Don't flinch. And next week, the rest of the world would finally catch up. By the time dessert came around, the wine had loosened everyone's tongues. The stories grew louder, less polished, and more performative. A guy from a mobility startup was ranting about a VC who ghosted him after leading the pre-seed. Another chimed in with a tale of a term sheet that vanished the morning of signing. It was a ritual, really, shared war stories, laced with bravado. Everyone took turns. Everyone played the part. Then someone said it. "I swear, man, this industry kills you by 50. You either exit or you expire." Laughter followed. The kind that punches downward but feels safe when you're the one saying it. I smiled like I always do. Nodded, sipped water. But inside, a small current shifted. I felt my phone buzz in my jacket pocket. Quiet. Precise. Just one alert. I pulled it out under the table, flicked the screen open. A message from Evelyn. Confirmed. 2.3x above target. Full subscription. You're live. That was it. No emoji. No exclamation point. just a fact. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Not to savor it, but to ground myself in it. This thing I had built in silence, with no press, no panels, no brand campaign, was now valued at more than double what we anticipated. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked around the table. They were still laughing. Still mid-story. Still unaware. I felt no urge to announce anything. No dramatic reveal. No clink of a glass to command attention. I'd always hated that part of these dinners, the way information was currency, weaponized in real time for clout. This wasn't for them. It never had been. Instead, I sat back, let the conversation flow around me like a stream around a stone. The waiter placed a small white plate in front of me. Something chocolate with a caramel drizzle, artfully swirled, barely touched by heat. I thanked him softly. Across the table, someone was bragging about a disruptive exit strategy. I nodded like I was still listening. But I wasn't. I thought about the first version of the software, the one that crashed when someone tried to export to Excel. I thought about the client in Iowa, the one who wired $2,300 before I had a payment portal. I thought about the legal pad Evelyn brought to our first meeting, filled with the kind of questions only people who actually care about outcomes ask. I took a bite of the dessert. It was bitter, then sweet. No one at that table knew what had just happened. And I preferred it that way. The waiter poured another round of wine just as someone raised their glass. To disruption, Evan declared, holding his glass high, grinning like a man who thought he was still at the center of gravity. Everyone echoed him. A chorus of buzzwords and ego, clinking crystal under dim designer lighting. I lifted my glass too, still water, still invisible. But before anyone could take the first sip, I set it gently back down. I should get going, I said, my voice just loud enough to cut the moment. Tomorrow's a big day. There was a brief pause. Not concern, curiosity. The kind you offer when someone breaks from the script. From the middle of the table, Trevor leaned forward, smirking. What, doctor's appointment? A few chuckles circled the room. Not cruel, just instinctive. I held his gaze for half a breath longer than he expected. No, I said quietly. Something small. I let the silence settle before finishing. Just ringing the opening bell. No emphasis. No grin. Just a simple fact delivered clean and dry. For a second, no one reacted. It didn't compute. Then I stood, slid the chair back with care, and reached for my coat. There was a flicker of recognition in Evan's eyes, like a page turning in his mind. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Behind me, someone muttered, "Wait, what?" I didn't turn around. Didn't wait for questions. I buttoned the top of my coat, nodded once to no one in particular, and walked out. The sound in the room didn't follow me. No one shouted. No one chased. I imagine they just sat there, frozen between the joke and the realization that the punchline had never been theirs. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. The valet hadn't noticed me yet. I stood for a moment beneath the soft halo of a streetlight, breathing in the stillness. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about having built something true enough to not need their approval. Something that could stand on its own, without the spotlight, without the noise. The bell would ring in less than 10 hours. Most of them would wake up to the headline. The valuation. The ticker symbol. Maybe even my name. Or maybe not. Maybe they'd never connect the man they called Old Guard with the one who walked out just before dessert. That, too, was fine. Not everything has to be explained. Some exits are cleaner when you don't look back.